Before we dive into today's episode, I have something truly special to share. Next September, I'll be leading an intimate women's retreat through the south of France and northern Italy, and you're invited. Picture this: mornings exploring the colorful markets of the French Riviera, afternoons sipping wine, and a hotel view with golden Mediterranean sunsets. Whether you love photography, food, or just want to reconnect with your playful creative self, this trip is designed for you. Spots are limited, so if all this sounds like your kind of adventure, please visit tourwithabsolutely.com and look for the tour France and Italy with Crystal. You can also send me a message or check out the show notes. Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway. So welcome back to Paris History, Avec, a Hemingway. I'm here with Claudine Hemingway, and today we are talking about Sylvia Beach, who I was doing a little research on to prep listening to the fabulous Claudine, of course, and she was born in Baltimore, Maryland, which is where I am from, and I'm sure you've all heard of Shakespeare and Company, the bookstore, but you may not have known who founded it, or if you did, you may not know all the fun facts that Claudine is about to share with us.
Yeah, Sylvia. Yeah, she was in Baltimore.
Baltimore, hun.
She's your homegirl there in Baltimore.
She is. Her and Zelda.
And Gertrude lived there for a little while.
Yeah, with the Coen sisters. What's up?
I know.
A lot of history in Baltimore, guys.
I know, it really is. I keep coming across it. I'm like, wow. But Sylvia, or, all of these ladies are always born with a different name. So Nancy Woodbridge Beach. And she later changed her dad. Her dad's name was Sylvester. And I think it was more, she was pretty close with her dad. So I think it was more of a, she changed it to Sylvia later. But she was born in Baltimore. She was the second of three daughters. And in 1901, her family, she was born in 1887. And so in 1901, her family moved to Paris because her father was named the assistant minister at the American Church of Paris.
That's so cool. I do a lot of photography events there. American Church in Paris. What's up?
I know. I was just like, oh, it's been around that long.
History there.
Yeah, long history. So they ended up moving to Paris. They stayed there for 4 years, and they in Paris. And she was, of course, very young. And then they moved back to Princeton, where he got another appointment, a pretty prestigious appointment at another church. And so they moved back to Princeton. And so she, grew up back in there. And so then in 1916, she decided to go to Spain. And she went there to study. This is before World War I. And she goes there to study. And she's, in Spain as she reads about, she keeps reading about all this stuff about contemporary French writing. And so she decided she wanted to go to Paris and to study contemporary French writing. So in 1917, she moves to Paris. And she was there. Her sister, Cyprienne, was also there. So the two of them shared an apartment at the Palais Royal. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we're having a Palais Royal day today.
I know. I think a lot of people don't know about the Palais Royal. Like when you go to visit Paris, it's hidden behind the Louvre. You must go there. It's absolutely beautiful. Just look
it is so beautiful. Like the garden. Oh, my God. It's like this little calm oasis in the middle of craziness.
And only locals go there. I feel like people from the Louvre don't really figure out it exists. So just look up Jardin de Palais Royal.
Yeah, because you kind of have to go. It's kind of the garden's kind of hidden back through. You go through. I think a lot of people go to where those black and white columns are, and then they stop. But the Palais Royal, it has it was built by, Cardinal Richelieu, and then it had a whole sordid history at one point about prostitution. And they say that that's where Napoleon lost his virginity.
Oh, that's so perfect. It made it even more interesting.
Exactly. But back to Sylvia.
Yeah, back to Sylvia.
So she was studying at the close to Palais Royal, the Bibliothèque Nationale. And one day she was reading this review of Paul Fort's book, The Vers and Prose. And it said in this, it was whole written up, and it was written up by this, and it mentioned this lady, Adrienne Monnier, and that she had this shop on Rue de l'Odéon, and that's where you could go buy this book. So she ends up going over to Rue de l'Odéon, the best street in Paris, and goes to this. She has this little tiny shop, and it's called Les Maisons des Amis de Livre. And she goes in there and she meets this little woman, and she's talking to her, and they ended up starting to have a friendship. And so after a little while, like she's just like, Sylvia's like, I want to go back and open up a bookstore in New York. And so at the time, like Adrienne's like, oh, you should. And, Monnier was just so ahead of her time. She was like one of the very first women to even own a shop in France.
Yeah.
Quite ahead of her time for what she was doing. And Rue de l'Odéon and that whole area, Odéon is my very favorite area in Paris, but that whole area was really like, it was all about bookstores and publishers, and it still kind of is today. Like you can still find a lot of that there.
Yeah.
But it was basically like you were a book person, that's where you went. So she had this little shop, and, Sylvia was like, well, I'm going to, I got to go back to the States. And her mom, Sylvia's mom said, that's right beginning, it's right about the start of it's almost the start of the war. And her mom says, well, just stay there. The dollar is better. You could get more for the money there. So she gives her daughter $3,000.
Nice.
And says, you just stay in Paris. So she's looking around, and she really wants to she wants to open an English bookstore. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of that in Paris. There wasn't a lot of English bookstores. Mm-hmm. So she ends up looking around, and just right around the corner from Rue de l'Odéon, just a few steps away, is a street. And I'm probably going to say it wrong. Dupuytren is just right around the corner from it. Like if you could pretty much barrel a hole through where Adrienne's store was, you'd probably end up going down the side street where this was.
Oh, cool.
That was the original Shakespeare Company. Everybody thinks it's the one on Rue de l'Odéon, but this was the original one. She opened it on November 19th, 1919.
19, all those 19s.
I know, which it was just like, that's so great. Like, did she do that on purpose?
Good publicity.
Very good publicity. She came up with a name one time. It came up to her in a dream. Shakespeare.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, so she opened this little tiny shop up, and she had a friend of hers paint this little sign that had a picture of Shakespeare on it, and she opened up this store, and at first it was pretty quiet, and Adrienne would sometimes send people over there to her, but it was it wasn't exactly a bustling business. Mm-hmm. And so later on that same year, a friend, Adrien Spires, who was a French poet, had invited Adrienne to a dinner party at his house. And she had to really convince Sylvia to go with her. Like, Sylvia's like, I just don't want to go. And Adrienne's like, just come, it'll be fine. And she goes to this party, and James Joyce is there. And wow. Sylvia was a huge fan of James Joyce, and she was like so nervous. Like she didn't and she ends up going up, like somebody else she knew was talking to him. So then she walks up and starts talking, and they sit down next to dinner, and she's at dinner next to him, and she's telling James about her shop and what she's doing. And he laughed at her when she told him the name and thought it was kind of funny. And but the next day, James came to the shop.
Wow. That must have been like such a big fantasy for her, like her idol walking into her store.
I know, it'd be like me meeting Neil Diamond.
You are Neil Diamond.
Yeah. So he comes into the store, and then he ends up coming basically like every day. And like James Joyce was kind of this funny, like they really describe him as kind of this kind of awkward, frumpy little guy. Like he was always wearing like dirty white shoes, and he just kind of like, he didn't, he became this, he was this huge author. Even at that point, he'd already done Finnegan's Wake and some other things. But he just kind of was this frumpy little guy that, they might have even thought he might have been homeless at one point.
He was kooky.
Kooky, but he would sit there all day in her shop, and he would write, and he would talk to her. And And so he was telling her he was working on this book, and he kept telling her about, this book, Ulysses he was writing, and he was really having a hard time getting a publisher. So she one day said, like, well, what if I publish it? And he's writing. This is a book in English, and at the time, like a friend of his had this little pamphlet called the Little Review, and it was published in the U.S. and this guy would buy like basically chapters of Ulysses, and Ulysses is like, I've started reading the book one day. I mean, it's like a doorstop. This book is so
huge.
It's a huge book.
Yeah.
All takes place in one single day.
Wow.
And so he is writing this book, but it's like, I don't even think, I mean, it's not like, I haven't really read the whole thing, but it was like so racy, they thought, in the US that it was banned. And
wow.
So, as soon as the copies of the Little Review came to the post offices, the police like took them and destroyed them.
Wow.
So he was like, really, like having a hard time. You can't get, if you're writing a book in English in the biggest English speaking country, you can't get the book into. He's having a problem. So he finally one day, she decides, she's like, well, what if I publish it? And, he was like so happy and so excited. So, she starts to, tries to find a publisher. She finds this publishing house in Dijon who will do it for her. So, he's finishing it up and he gets it all done, and she's going out to Dijon and she's working with them. And she's, the first edition comes out and he gets it. And James is like, oh, all these things need to be changed, or I'm going to change this part of the story. And he just goes through, and like, she's paying for all of this. Like,
gosh,
she does not have that much money and she's paying for all of this. But she ends up, what she does is basically like, she kind of did like the first Kickstarter. So like what we would call Kickstarter today is like, she basically sold people a subscription to the book before it was ever printed.
That was so smart.
Yeah, and the publisher in Dijon actually was like fine with it. Like, okay, yeah, let's just do it that way. So it wasn't like she had to come up with all this money ahead of time. So people were, quite a few people were buying the book. Some people, like, Hemingway would buy like a couple copies in advance. So she was getting some money for it. But then James, like every time edition would come out, he would just mark it all up and be like, this is wrong. I want to change this. So she went back 7 times.
He was being so difficult.
Very difficult. So it's all coming, like you can only sell so many subscriptions when he keeps changing it. So she, at this point, she's kind of pulling out her hair. It almost bankrupts her. In 1921, she ended up moving the store. In May 1921, she moved it over to where on number 12 Rue de l'Odéon. Adrian kept watching this antique store that was across the street. It's kind of up and across the street from hers, and could see that they were looked like they were packing up. And so she would watch it intently. And like when she saw that, went up for lease, she instantly tells Sylvia. She and Sylvia, had become involved. They were, partners. They were together. She like told her. And so Sylvia comes over. The store was a little bit bigger. And so that was kind of nice. She had more space. So, but James Joyce, he was really difficult to deal with. He, couldn't get he couldn't get the book into the US. He was having a hard time even getting it to England. And so, he was such a pain. And actually one day, Hemingway was in the store and she was telling him about it. And he was like, give me 24 hours.
Wow.
He actually had gone when Ernest and Hadley had their son, Bumby, they had the baby in Canada, in Toronto. And he had made quite a few friends there. And there was no problem selling the book in Canada.
So they picked it up.
So what he did is he contacted a friend in Canada, got the information back to Sylvia. Sylvia would send this friend like cases of the book. This guy would put a book down his pants.
Oh my God.
Book underneath his shirt, and he would take like the ferry or the train or whatever he was doing to get into New York almost every day with a couple copies of the book.
Wow, it's like selling drugs, this book.
I know, they were smuggling them in.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the reason why, it ended up working out and coming to the US was because of Hemingway.
That's so funny that they're all connected. And
They're-
Hemingway was a very good friend to Sylvia
yeah,
always.
they were very good. He ended up coming in there right after she had moved in December. They got there at the end of December 1921. He ended up going in and to the Rue de l'Odeon. He had a letter actually from his friend Sherwood Anderson, who gave him a bunch of letters, which, has come up a lot of times when we talk about Gertrude Stein and everybody else. But he ended up not showing Sylvia the letter. He ended up going in there one day, and they instantly became, very quick friends.
Yeah, I read that she lent him a bunch of books for free and was just so nice to him, and he always appreciated that.
Yeah, she set up a basically a book rental system, and you could at the time rent a certain amount of books. So you'd pay a certain amount, and you get like 1 or 2 books a month. You pay a little bit more, and you get 2 or 4 books. And between Ernest and Hadley, they were reading so much that he would go in there, and he was like, "I need more books," and so she kind of was just like, "We'll just take whatever you need for whatever it was probably just pennies, back
Yeah,
then.
she was so supportive of all the artists.
Yeah, she was really. They would use her store as their post office. So most of the expats would have all their mail sent to Shakespeare and Company.
That's so fun.
Yeah, and they would just all be there. You would be there, and here comes Ford Maddox Ford, and here comes Stein, and you could be sitting there any old day, and here's all these people. Like, to them at that time, they were just regular old people.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh my gosh,
To be a fly on the wall back then.
But in 1930, James and Sylvia never had a contract. They never had anything like written down about what, like in stone about the selling of the book or publishing. But in 1930, they decided to write up a contract. And in the contract dated December 9th, 1930, that he had said, this is, Sylvia takes all the risk as far as publishing, basically he could back out of it at any time, but she was taking all of the risks. It was all on her.
Why did she even write a contract? She could have done that without writing a contract.
Yeah, she probably didn't really care. And so at this point, Jane's always, there's all these stories about him that was basically like, he was so poor, but then even Hemingway wrote about a movable feast that they said they were so poor, but he and his wife and children were at one of the nicest restaurants in Paris every single night having dinner.
Because he just abused everybody and used them.
Yeah. So in the 1930, beginning of 1930 or the end of 1930, he ended up starting, the ban in the U.S. was easing up, and he was really looking for a way to get it published. Random House ended up publishing it for him and giving him $45,000.
Wow, well, he's not poor anymore.
I mean, what that translates to now, it's got to be insane compared.
And he didn't do anything for Sylvia.
No. And so he didn't go in there and talk to her. She would be hearing that he was looking for a publisher and this was happening. He would send different friends in there to be like, you really need to let him out of his contract. But
wow.
He was the one that said that he could back out of it at any time. And so finally one day she called him and said, she talked to him and said, we're done with this. And he basically was like, okay. And he never gave, he basically almost bankrupted her.
What a jerk.
Yeah. So he, it's kind of a cruddy story that he did that to her, especially after, what she did to, really help him out and to kind of, save his book when he was really going through a hard time.
Yeah. She was like his fan club and he just abused it.
Yeah. To get $45,000 in 1930. That's gotta be like
crazy amount of money
now. That's a lot of money back then. But Hemingway came in there and at the end of December, 1922, sorry, he came in there and they met and they became really good friends, and they were very close until the end of his life. She wrote a book that she wrote about her life and Shakespeare and Company, and just says the most glowing, wonderful things about him. He wrote about her immovable feast, about how, she had these great legs, but she had the warmest smile, and nobody has ever been nicer to me in my life than Sylvia Beach.
Wow. That's quite the compliment coming from Hemingway.
Yeah. It's pretty adorable, but her, because of Ulysses and all of that, her shop became, started to become really popular. And American Express would bring like tourists, they'd take them on like little tourist tours of Paris. And they literally would stop at, that was like on the tour. They'd stop.
That's so cute.
And take people in there to go see her. But in the, here in the, the mid 1930s, she was really having a hard time. And author Andre Gide came into the store and asked her how she was doing. And she actually told him, well, I'm not doing very well. I'm thinking about closing the shop. And he was like, just horrified and was just like, no, wait, don't do that. He left. He ended up talking to like all of the authors and friends in Paris. He ended up setting up a thing called the Friends of Shakespeare and Company, and got all of these people to give 200 francs a year, and what that for the next few years. And basically it would all go to Sylvia, and all of these different authors would set up book readings in her store.
Oh, that's so smart. And they still continue that on today.
They still continue that on today. And even Hemingway did one of them, which he always would, like, he never would read, he would never do things like that, but he did one for her. And so it really helped save her store and got her a lot of money, because it's, 200 francs a year back then for a couple of years was a pretty good chunk.
Great.
Of money.
Yeah.
She also decided to create like a catalog of a lot of her, treasured books, like first editions and stuff. And at this point, Hemingway was kind of starting to take off. She was the first one to ever sell his first book in our time.
Oh, wow.
And then the 10 Stories book. And so those were being sold. And at this point, he was kind of starting to get a little more well known. And he, as The Sun Also Rises had come out. And so a lot of people are reaching out to her to buy, his books. And she was really ahead. Like now today, those are things people do today, but it does, you don't hear those things like in this, 80s.
No. Yeah. She was so ahead of her time. She was such a great entrepreneur.
Yeah. She was really ahead of her time. And then of course, the war starts, and, everything's kind of fine at the beginning. And she's, in Paris, and she still has her store. And, there's a lot of people that, a lot of the Americans that were there really appreciated having a store that they could buy books. But in 1941, a German officer stopped by her store, and in the window was a copy of Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. And he had come in there, and he said that he wanted to buy it. And she said, no, it's not for sale. And she goes, it's my only copy. It's not for sale. And he was like, got really mad, was like, why won't you sell it? And she was like, nope, it's not for sale. And he was like, okay. So he left. 2 weeks later, he comes back, and comes in there, and he wants the book. And she had hid the book. Said, where's the book? I want this book. And she was like, well, I don't have it anymore. And he was so mad that he left, and he said, we will be back tonight. And
oh no.
So, it's 1941, it's the Germans, and it's occupied Paris. And so she, got a hold of all of her friends. In 2 hours, all of these friends came. She talked to the concierge of the building that she was in, that there was an empty apartment on the 3rd floor. All of her friends would bring like baskets, like, laundry baskets and anything else they could. They completely emptied the entire store in 2 hours.
That's so smart.
Including the furniture. A carpenter came in, took apart the shelves on the wall.
Wow.
Painted over her sign out front. Basically, within 2 hours, it went from being a shop to just absolutely nothing.
That's so crazy they did that in 2 hours. And also it just shows how much the community loved her.
Yeah, I mean, she's very beloved. She had an apartment that came with a store on the 2nd floor, but she and Adrienne lived just up the street at 18 Rue de l'Odéon, which is also the same building that my friend John Baxter lives in. So there's a little story coming up that makes me, every time I go in that building, it just, like, it's so crazy. But they did all this. And so they came back that night, and everything was gone. But then they came back a few days later, and this time they came back for Sylvia, and took her, sent her to an internment camp in Vittel, and she was there for 6 months.
Oh, wow. I thought they sent her to live in a zoo at first or something. Is that true?
Well, there is what they call the people. There was at one point there was out near the Bois de Vincennes, and it was called the People Zoo.
Yeah.
And it's this really creepy story where it'd be like they literally would have people in these houses and cages, and be like, here's people from Cambodia. Here's the
Yeah, it was super screwed up. I thought that they encamped her there first, and it wasn't like a super
yeah.
prison because you could pay to come talk to her.
Yeah, just like yeah, so horrible. So
Yeah, yeah, disgusting. So then she was basically in a concentration camp?
yeah, she was in a concentration camp for 6 months, and then she was able to return to Paris. But they told her there at any time they could take her and take her back, send her back.
Mm-hmm.
So she ended up staying in this tiny student hostel on like the very top floor in this teeny tiny room. She knew the woman, kind of hid her there on Boulevard Saint Michel. And she was just basically stayed in this little tiny room. She would end up sneaking out during the day. She'd go back and visit Adrian, who was still there, was still there on Rue de l'Odéon. And she basically had to stay in this tiny apartment until the liberation. The occupation
Wow.
was over.
I mean, what a nightmare.
Yeah. And so she ended up walking, like she was able to get out. The liberation was coming through. And just like, the liberation didn't just mean like, hey, one day this is done, Germans were gone. Like they liberated Paris and they're still fighting. Like the Germans were still there. They were still shooting people. She's leaving and she's, Boulevard Saint Michel is pretty close to Odeon. And she's walking back and they're going down the street in tanks and just shooting people walking down the street.
Wow.
Like just terrifying. So she gets back to Rue de l'Odéon and, it kind of starts, calms down. They're in their apartment at number 18. And so one day they're there and they, have the window open and all of a sudden they hear a man's voice on the street screaming, Sylvia, Sylvia. And she looks out the window and she's like, and it's Hemingway. And he's coming down and, there's a famous story of him liberating the Ritz. Well, before he went to the Ritz, he went to Rue de l'Odéon. So he comes down the street and he's got these men, he's trying to gather all these men that he was going to go liberate liberate everything else. So he's got, guns and he has all this stuff. And so here's Hemingway. He's got this Jeep. He's got men, he's got guns. Sylvia and Adrian come running down on the street and they give him a big hug. And, he's dirty and he's got blood on him. And it's Hemingway. He's a man's man. So he goes back up to their apartment and he's like, asking how they are and asking how everything was. And he was like, what can I do for you? And so Sylvia said, well, can you make the shooting stop? Because there was Germans on the roof of Rue de l'Odéon on somewhere on the street, and they were still shooting at people. So he was like, okay. So he leaves, he goes back down to the Jeep and he gets the guns and he gets the men and they go back up and they go onto the roof and there's a bunch of shooting and then it just stops.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. So everybody says how he liberated the Ritz, but he really didn't because they were already gone. But he did liberate Rue de l'Odéon.
He saved Sylvia.
Sylvia. So every time I go in there, like for me, like the first time I've gone and John's his mother-in-law actually had this apartment and her name was Claudine and she's still alive. She's pretty old. She's actually, it was her apartment. She was a professor at the Sorbonne. He and his wife got married, they ended up eventually taking over the apartment. And it's like, for me to be able to walk in there and literally be walking, I know I'm in the footsteps.
That's really cool. I mean, that must feel amazing.
It's pretty cool. So, but it's pretty sad because Adrienne, she ended up she had like Mariner's disease, and she would get really dizzy and get like really confused. And so on June 19th, 1955, she ended up killing herself.
She killed herself.
Overdosing on sleeping pills.
Oh, that's so sad.
Adrienne did. So, she and Sylvia were so close for so long, and it was really hard and very sad. And then Sylvia stayed in the same apartment. She ended up dying on October 5th, 1962 of a heart attack alone. They didn't find her for days.
Oh, that's so sad. I hear that it happens so often in Paris because no one visits anybody when they're older. But that's super sad because she had so many friends.
It's so sad. So, it's Sylvia, like today, like I've talked to John about this, and if you walk down Rue de l'Odéon, and in Paris there's plaques on every other corner about something, and there is a plaque where the Shakespeare Company used to be, and it basically just says that that's where Ulysses was published.
Oh.
But there's no plaque, there's no plaque on, at number 18 where she lived. And John said actually that a lot of people, bunch of people actually got together and they were trying to get one made. But, like anything in France, there's so much, bureaucracy and stuff you have to go through that they ended up not doing it. But it is kind of sad that, there's really no remembrance of Sylvia and everything that she did. I mean, today there is Shakespeare and Company, the bookstore now, which a man named George opened, and it was originally called La Mistral, and it was actually at a different location, and then they moved it to where it is now that we know. And after Sylvia died, he was such a huge fan of Sylvia that after she died, he ended up changing the name of it to Shakespeare and Company. He even named his daughter Sylvia Beach.
Oh my God, he really loves Sylvia.
Yeah. And so upstairs in one of the rooms is a very small selection of some of the books that actually came from Sylvia's Shakespeare and Company, which I think is pretty cool.
That is cool.
But, sharing the name, and I mean, it's definitely always inspired by Sylvia, but other than that, it doesn't really, it's not really affiliated with Sylvia except for being inspired by her.
Mm-hmm,
so, it's kind of sad. I mean, it's great to carry on the name and carry on that legacy, but it is pretty sad that, she never really opened the store after the war. She opened it for a day or two and then ended up closing it and then never reopened it again.
That's such a sad ending to everything she did, but obviously she was loved because so many people helped her, and she discovered her place as an American expat in Paris during troubling times.
Yeah, and she was definitely such a huge support for so many of them, and especially all the wonderful things she said about Hemingway and he said about her. I think it's such a sweet relationship the two of them had. Mm-hmm. And, she had that with so many of them. And even for all of those people to save her store when, she was thinking about closing it, and, James Joyce and what he did. And that was, he didn't really do anything to help her.
Yeah. That guy sounded like a loon anyway, though.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a loon. Yeah.
But I mean, what a legacy. And even though the Shakespeare and Company today is not the same, it sparked interest in so many visitors and causes people to, investigate more, if anything, and want to know that history. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. She was so ahead of her. I mean, she's so ahead of her time. I mean, basically the Kickstarter and the book club and so many things that she did was so ahead of what, anybody else was doing.
And so wild for her to even think to do that and to survive the war after making a Nazi angry is pretty good.
I love that she was like, nope, it's not for sale. You can't have it. And,
I'd be like, take the book.
Just kind of this little, she, wasn't, she wasn't tiny, but she wasn't some big tall woman. I could just, I just imagine this, one of the Nazi officers from a movie, this big, tall, scary looking guy. I want the book. And she was like, nope.
Sorry, no. She was so brave, and she did so much for the Paris community, especially the expatriate community. So very cool.
Yeah, she's pretty awesome.
Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Paris History Avec Hemingway with Claudine Hemingway. Don't forget to check out her website, more information, her Instagram, and tune in next week for another fabulous woman in French history.
See you then. Thank you for listening to Paris History Avec Hemingway. If you want to find out some more, you could always find me on my Instagram page, Claudine Bleu Blanc Rouge, and that's BLEU, as in the French way to spell it. And each day I post a daily history lesson about a person or a place or something in Paris, or it's lots of fun facts. And then also at ClaudineHemingway.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter there.